Personal story segment tonight. Over the weekend, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said this about the tyrant Assad in Syria.
There is a different leader in Syria now. Many of the members of Congress of both parties who have gone to Syria in recent months have said they believe he's a reformer.
Well, that statement causing much controversy, as Assad is generally considered to be a very bad guy. And today, Secretary Clinton clarified.
I referenced opinions of others. I was not speaking either for myself or for the administration.
Joining us now from Washington to analyze, Charles Krauthammer. So Hillary got scolded, I think, from the Assad soundbite. I think that's what happened.
Well, because it was a travesty, and her walk back is not terribly convincing. I mean, after all, I was citing other people. Look, you can cite 100 sources on Assad. An overwhelming majority will tell you he's a thug, he's a murderer. And to cite one opinion out of 100 that he's not, that he's something other than that, and then to attribute it to both Republicans and Democrats in the Congress, i.e. to give it authority, is to obviously endorse it. That's why she had to walk it back, because it's such a scandalous statement. But it reflects the policy of this administration to be completely hands-off with Syria, which is strategically incomprehensible and morally indefensible. And they're being hands-off with Syria exactly the way, as you mentioned earlier in the show, Obama was hands-off with Iran in 2009. And these are the two worst regimes in the area, morally the worst and strategically the most inimical to the United States. And why is it that these two get a pass when the administration will go to war over Libya and will try to get Mubarak out of Egypt as they
Well,
did?
I think it's all about deal-making, and I think that the United States is a back channel with Assad, and they make some deals. But when you say Syria and Assad are morally reprehensible, tell the audience why you believe that.
Well, the Assad regime has a history of repression that makes Gaddafi look like a Boy Scout. It starts in 1982 with Hama, where Assad, the father, killed 20,000 people in a week, paved over the city. And that has instilled a reign of terror for these decades that makes the demonstrations unbelievably courageous and heroic. People are getting, Syria is the last country in the region you would have expected an uprising, because everyone knows this is the worst, the most severe Orwellian police state in the region. You speak and you disappear. And yet you get people out in the streets who are getting shot openly by the army and police and continue day after day. In those circumstances, for the United States, which now, as the president said last night, priding himself as a humanitarian who will not stand by, for the United States to not only stand by, but to actually endorse the idea of the brutal dictator as a reformer, which is a way to undermine the entire case of the protesters in the street, is a disgrace.
Yeah, I thought it was disturbing. I thought it was very, very disturbing for Secretary of Clinton to take that posture. And there is an added component that Assad and his father, who you referenced in the massacre in the early 80s, actively support terrorist groups that kill civilians. I mean, without Syria and Iran, these terrorist groups could not exist.
And not only as civilians, Assad in the last decade has allowed hundreds of al-Qaeda to go through Syria into Iraq to kill Americans. The Assads are the ones who supported Hezbollah and the terrorist attack on the Marine barracks in the early 1980s, American blood on their hands. Apart from all the blood of the Syrians and the Lebanese on their hands, who do you think was behind the murder of Rafik Hariri's father, the prime minister of Lebanon, the explosion in the mid-decade, which led to the kicking of the Syrians out of Lebanon? This is a regime that kills wantonly. But this administration had the idea, as it did with the mullahs in Iran, that we are so expert in our diplomacy that we want to support the regime against the demonstrators, against the Democrats in the streets, because we will sweet-talk them, Iran into giving up its nukes and Syria into giving up its relationship with Iran.
Okay.
And that has been an abysmal failure.
Last question. I have a minute left. If all you say is true, and I believe it is, why does President Obama want to get rid of Gaddafi so much but not Assad?
Well, on the one hand, it's simply opportunity. Gaddafi is weaker. He lives on the coast. Our Navy is there. He's a minute from the air bases in Italy, and we're not going to start a war in Syria. But secondly, I think he doesn't want to touch Syria because since the beginning of his administration, he's had the idea that he can sweet-talk it into breaking its alliance with Iran, giving up Hezbollah, and becoming a partner in peace. And that's why he sent our ambassador. He returned an ambassador there. And that's why he and Hillary have been saying nothing about this.
All right.
And they actually think they're going to have successful diplomacy with the thug and the murderer. And that is simply not so.
Charles.